Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the International Seapower Symposium at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and we have with us Vice Admiral Mike Franken, who is the Deputy Commander of US Africa Command. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Obviously, this is 100 naval and Coast Guard leaders, or rather, I should say, naval and Coast Guard leaders from more than 100 countries are here. Many of the African nations are well represented. You are the deputy commander in this important theater, but it's a very young command comparatively compared with some of the others. There was some skepticism years ago when President Bush announced it. But give us sort of a sense on, from a confidence building standpoint, from a dialogue standpoint, and from a cooperation standpoint, where does the command stand today?
Well, I think the skepticism has dashed, frankly. We are exceedingly busy, and matter of fact, I was just in the Pentagon earlier this week, and the first thing spoken to me was, aren't you very, very busy? You are in the same category as Central Command, and in many respects we are. We have introduced a theater campaign plan to better parse our efforts out on the continent. So the multiple lines of effort, but concentrating on the East Africa, North Africa, West Africa, and the various confidence building measures that we can do with our partners on the continent, and also doing our very best to increase the effort to tamp down on the smuggling, human, drug, and various nefarious actors crossing the continent, passing into Europe and elsewhere.
But how long do you think it'll be, or will it be ever, where there will be sort of joint U.S. bases as the United States has throughout Asia and throughout Europe and elsewhere?
Well, we have a significant facility in Djibouti. And I think one of the most important things the command has done in the last, since 2008, is it's giving the nation options. And it's not only military options, it's State Department, USAID, facilities from which international non-government organizations can work in approximately 22 different locations on the continent. Keeping in mind that the continent is vast. Africa was ill-served by Mercator. It's a huge place. You can put multiple United States in it. Matter of fact, United States, Europe, China can all fit in the confines of the geographic area of Africa. So 22 locations thereabouts of varying size, most of which is mostly just an agreement with the host nation that we can use this area next to an airport to give the nation options when there's a humanitarian issue, or we want to conduct an exercise with host nation, or potentially conduct something more significant with a nation or an international effort. That gives just the nation options. And I think, interestingly, I was involved in the stand-up of Africa Command when I was at Central Command, and there was a lot of skepticism, you're right. And I saw this with my State Department colleagues, that they were a little bit apprehensive about all this. Frankly, what's changed in the last 8 years is a deep appreciation of the 3D, the development, defense, and diplomacy side of efforts in U.S. embassies. It's enriching, and now, rather than being apprehensive of the government, of the military side and that 3D, they're covetous, and they're actually try to outmaneuver each other from nation to nation, embassy to embassy, to see who can most work with us in a 3D process. So it's been a phenomenal turnaround, and I'm happy to be part of that effort.
How is the United States working? Obviously, France, for example, former colonial power, but a big player in Africa. Some of the other European countries as well. The United Kingdom has very good relationships as well with some of the countries there. How are you working with some of America's oldest allies in order to help improve regional security and stability?
I was trying to look for the verb for the French, frankly. It's more than a partnership. It's more than an ally. It's almost a brother-in-arms effort in much of Central and West Africa. We are assisting them in logistics while they are They and many other international efforts, the Dutch, the Germans, working in Mali, the international organizations, the AU, the EU, the UN, all have done phenomenal work, and they are, like I said, more than partners. The French, in particular, are keeping a substantial number of personnel on the continent, somewhere around 9,000, and they provide a stabilizing influence in many nations that are, although well distant from their colonial past, are still finding their footing and the basic sensibilities of rule of law and democracy.
You're also, when people think about the global fight against ISIS and terrorism, they have a tendency of thinking of the operations that are going on in Syria and in Iraq. They have a tendency of thinking in Afghanistan, but folks don't think as much about the extensive efforts that are ongoing in Africa. Bring us up to speed on the range of operations, insofar as you can do that you have ongoing, and the partnerships you have ongoing to do that, but also how you would rate the success you've been having in that campaign.
Well, let's start first in our line of effort number 2, which is in Libya, and there we are assisting in an international effort to put down and take Daesh out of the equation, mostly in the area of Sirte. Our operations kinetically are only involved in the area of Sirte against the counter-Daesh effort. And we're working with the Government of National Accord out of Tripoli and other entities, international entities in Libya, to and I think so. To your question about how successful, I think exceedingly successful. Over 90% of Sirte is now been taken back. ISIL is on their heels. They are just a few. I think measured in tens of soldiers who are holding off, perhaps up to 100, but not much more than that, in the area of Sirte. Our strikes, combined with entities mostly centered from around Misrata, are doing a phenomenal job of clearing the city at great hardship, I should add, and so that's working well. Somalia, a long-serving effort, almost a decade now that we've been involved in Somalia. We would have liked to have gone better. There are Al-Shabaab there, as you know. There are ISIL adherents. So we are working with the AU, the regional partners, and the Amazon forces to establish the Somali National Army, to establish the precepts of good governance. And it's a struggle. There are current efforts to take a step back and to reassess our level of effort there, and to perhaps more focus an end state, which I'm hopeful of. Boko Haram, we're assisting with intelligence and know-how, the effort in the Lake Chad region, Nigeria, Benin, Niger, Cameroon, and that's efforts working reasonably well. I think that, but that's an Africa problem, a Nigerian problem, which they're working and handling on their own timeline, with some assistance from us.
Are the operations that you're doing there kind of a good prototype for how the United States should be involved in solving some of these longer-term problems with a small footprint, large unmanned aircraft activity, conventional aircraft, application of air power? Is it, in your view, sort of a prototype or a model for other places in the world?
Well, there's some healthy skepticism regarding nation building. And I think it's as a result of 15 years of the effort in Central Command, and that's well-founded, frankly. We are trying to develop a very intellectual approach to our efforts in Africa. We have over 6,000 U.S. Military personnel on the continent, and we are looking across the range of military operations in concert with the diplomatic side and state and aid and international partners to say what is within the realm of the doable and how do we best position the nations of Africa and the organizations representing those nations to realize a viable future and realize that what is not to create nations in our likeness, but rather what works for them and what works for their citizenry.
Let me ask you two last quick questions. Question number one is on drone strikes. I mean, that's a question that comes up all the time. It is also being used in your theater. What can you tell people about, and then there are always questions about, whether they were being used indiscriminately or not. What can you say, given that you're involved in this process, about the nature of the process that allows the application of this kind of force?
Well, first of all, a wanton use of a better word for drones is remotely piloted air vehicles. The accuracy and the very constructed process behind a strike is refined to the nth degree, and the numbers bear that out. We strike only targets that are carefully vetted with the nation with what we're partnered with, and only after a lengthy and I'm speaking in AFRICOM here, a lengthy oversight of those targets to ensure the efficacy of the targeting process. And I think if you walk back on our strikes that we've done in the last significant period of time, they've been quite admirable in how exacting we are. I'm a big believer in remotely piloted vehicles, and realize the benefit of that, and it's manifest in the way we conduct our operations. I think that what's also valuable with using remotely piloted RPAs is that they can be used for other things. The surveillance and the ability for the enemy to realize that we're watching, I think, has some long-term benefits in terms of prosecuting potential war crimes and the like. So you'll have a difficult time of walking me back from the use of RPAs.
Let me take you to the last question, which is the importance of conferences like this. You are a sailor, but you've also spent the vast majority of your job over the third of your career have been, and the most recent, right, has been almost all joint jobs with the exception of Navy legislative liaison. How important are conferences like this? Because there's a perception some people have that they're sort of empty talking shops, but what do you see as the great value in it?
Well, having a talking shop is not all bad. So the social aspects, let's start there. Last night I sat at dinner with a table from Honduras and Seychelles, and Belgium, et cetera, from all the continents. And by the end of the evening, we're exchanging email addresses and pictures and formulating how we can combine for, and these are senior individuals, how we can combine for future operations. And that's both the member, the service member, and also the spouse. So from a social aspect, a congealing aspect, this is all good. Now, professionally, I think this is a baselining opportunity, baselining from a cyber perspective, from an exercise perspective, getting the best practices ironed out. And also, I sat in a panel yesterday to talk about piracy. And not only is what's spoken there, but what's not spoken, and the inference, and the best, and then here again, the best practices are shared. This is a fabulous time for nations that oftentimes, even the regional partners that don't speak as much as they ought to, for them to be forced in a situation with the altruistic U.S. Presence, I think, is fair to say, that gives them an opportunity to talk it out and gives them an opportunity to have a step back, separate the emotions which may have generated from past practices, and to go forward in a single line abreast to tackle a very vexing issue. And so I'm a fan of this. This is hard for me to find time to do, and I did it with the approval of my boss. And in retrospect, I'm glad I was here for this.
As the French Navy chief said, it's really great because everybody's in one place, so it actually makes it a lot easier than traveling to 100 different places.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does.
Sir, thanks very, very much, and all the very best.
My pleasure, Vago. Thank you, sir.